Prayer may be the single most protective thing you can do for your brain. Better than a pill, a puzzle, or even a supplement. It can be something you can do sitting perfectly still with your eyes closed for free. Researchers studying how people live longer and how they hold on to their memory keep circling back to one ancient habit, prayer. And in the next few minutes, I'm going to show you exactly what they found and why. 5 things you'll learn today. Scientists put praying nuns and monks inside a brain scanner and watched one region of their brain roar to life while another went completely dark. The largest experiment on prayer ever attempted on 1,800 heart patients resulted in a result that the researchers never even wanted to publish. There's a single number, 31%, that should stop anyone who lives alone. A monk in the year 400 and a physician in the year 1170 described the human mind so precisely that modern neuroscience is only now catching up. And last, when memory collapses at the end of life in people living with dementia, one thing survives even longer than a person's own name. Here's why this matters to you. If you're aging or caring for someone who is, or just simply laying awake at night afraid of losing your memory, the research I'm about to walk you through points to something that's free, safe, and sitting in front of you already. Please share this with one person who needs to hear it, a friend or a family member, or someone that's carrying a heavy load, because I think this can really help people. I'm Neal K. Shah, a Johns Hopkins and NIH-funded caregiving researcher and the CEO of CareYaya. I've helped thousands of families navigate aging, dementia, and serious illness. I'm not a clinician, but a leading researcher and innovator in caregiving, and my job is to read the studies so that you don't have to. I think the truth about prayer and the brain is way more interesting than the skeptics want you to understand. Let's start with a finding that pulled me into this. Researchers at the University of South Australia, led by Dr. Madison Mello, published the results in 2024 in the Journals of Gerontology, one of the most respected journals in the science of aging. They took nearly 400 older adults and did something really clever. Instead of asking vague questions about activities, they mapped the entire 24-hour day into buckets: sleep, screen time, exercise, chores, social time, and quiet time, and matched those patterns against careful memory and thinking tests. What they found overturned decades of advice. We were all told, move more and sit less, but this study found that not all sitting is equal. 2 people can be still for the same 3 hours, and their brains can be doing totally opposite things. Passive screen time, like watching television, scrolling on your phone, or playing video games, was linked to worse thinking scores. But a specific kind of quiet and still activity was linked to much better memory and sharper thinking. Reading, listening to music, doing arts and crafts, playing a musical instrument, and prayer. Prayer landed big in the protective column. Prayer was the one activity in a group that tracked much better cognition. And it raised the question, why a silent and motionless act would do anything for the brain at all? The answer took scientists 100 years to chase down, and it starts with a nun in a scanner. In the late 1990s, a physician named Andrew Newberg did something that sounds like science fiction. He invited Franciscan nuns and Tibetan Buddhist monks into a lab, waited until they reached the deepest point of prayer or meditation, and then used a scan called SPECT, S-P-E-C-T, to photograph which parts of the brain were working the hardest. SPECT tracks blood flow. And think about blood flow like a delivery truck in your brain. Wherever it goes, the brain is doing the work. He called the field neurotheology and even wrote a book about it in 2001 with an unforgettable title, Why God Won't Go Away. What he saw during prayer was not just one bright spot in the brain. It was 2 opposite shifts happening at once. First, a surge of blood flow into the prefrontal cortex. That's the patch right behind your forehead. Think about it like the CEO of your brain. It's responsible for attention, focus, decision-making, and emotional control. And why that matters after age 50. The prefrontal cortex is the last region to fully mature in your brain when we're young, and it's also one of the first to shrink and lose blood flow as we start to age. Think about that morning fog, that word that's stuck on the tip of your tongue. It all starts there. Focused prayer lights up that region beautifully. Second, even stranger, blood flow dropped in the superior parietal lobe, the area near the top back of your head that keeps track of where your body ends and the world begins. When that part quiets down, the border between you and everything else in the world totally softens, which is exactly the moment people describe feeling peace, timelessness, and communion with something larger. Neurologically, that's your threat radar switching off. Now, Newberg's scans studied only a handful of people, so consider this as like preliminary evidence. I think it pointed at something that later work keeps supporting. Prayer isn't just one task. It's several at once. Attention, language, emotion, and memory all firing together. And that combination is exactly the profile that brain scientists look for in a protective activity. I think prayer is a full workout for the mind, done sitting still, which raises the next question. If the brain is that busy, what's happening to the body? For that, we go to a Harvard cardiologist who thought he was studying blood pressure. In 1968, meditation practitioners walked into a Harvard lab of a heart doctor named Herbert Benson and asked him to study them. He was skeptical at first, but he studied them anyway. In his 1975 book, The Relaxation Response, Benson showed that a simple, repeated mental focus, like a word, a phrase, a prayer said over and over, produces a measurable physical shift. The heart slows, blood pressure falls, breathing deepens, and the body burns less oxygen. It's the exact opposite of fight or flight mode that happens when you're really stressed. Benson was careful about one thing. He said that he'd invented nothing. Every major religion had discovered this centuries before him. The repeated rosary, the chanted psalm, the whispered name of God, prayer beads that are worn smooth by a thumb over decades. He simply put it on a monitor and watched the numbers just drop. So why does that matter for your memory? Because I think chronic stress is quite corrosive for your brain. When you're stressed out for months or years on end, your body floods with a hormone called cortisol. Sustained high cortisol is associated with damage to the brain's hippocampus. That's the memory saving center, and one of the very first places that Alzheimer's and dementia attacks. So anything that can reliably switch off the stress response day after day is protecting the tissue that holds together who you are. This is free, safe, and doesn't even need a prescription from the doctor. And here's where I think it gets remarkable, because what modern brain scans are showing, two thinkers described by candlelight, long before anyone even knew that the brain had lobes. Go back to the year 400. A Christian monk named Ponticus sat in the Egyptian desert studying his own mind, and he noticed something every one of us knows, that intrusive and poisonous thoughts that loop and won't let go. He gave them a name, logismoi, the Greek word for these tormenting thought patterns. And his prescription reads almost like a modern therapy manual. He described oratio, focused prayer, and nepsis, a word that means watchfulness, basically catching a bad thought before it spirals. 1,600 years before anyone invented cognitive behavioral therapy, a monk in the desert figured out that you can break a destructive mental loop by deliberately redirecting your attention. It's almost word for word what psychologists teach people today. Now jump to the year 1170. Maimonides, a philosopher, wrote that the body and the mind are one system, and neither is healthy without the other. He taught that prayer done with kavana, which is a Hebrew word meaning true inner focus, not just saying things on autopilot, really calms an agitated soul and sharpens the intellect. This was a working doctor and philosopher that was treating the king of the day. He was prescribing focused prayer as medicine for the mind. And 800 years later, the brain scans agree. It's the focus during prayer that does the work, not just the words alone. By the way, if insights like these are really helpful to you, please take a second to follow along or subscribe. I do this every single week and cover the research that sometimes mainstream never touches. Now, the number I talked about earlier, the 31%. Of everything today, this is one of the most interesting findings. In 2024, researchers pulled 21 long-term studies, more than 600,000 people, followed for years, into one of the largest analyses ever done on this question. Loneliness by itself was associated with a 31% higher risk of developing dementia. And to make it even worse, it was simply the feeling of being alone, even if you lived in a full house. Now put that next to the 2023 warning from the US Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, who described loneliness as a public health epidemic. Drawing on the work of researcher Julianne Holt-Lundstad, the report concluded that chronic loneliness carries a death risk comparable to smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day. Think about it. We'd never watch a loved one smoke that many cigarettes a day without saying something to them. And yet, millions of older adults we know are sitting exactly in that danger zone every single day. And oftentimes nobody names it or helps them take urgent action. I think fighting loneliness in older adults is something we can all do as a society. And I spend a lot of my work encouraging younger people to spend time with elderly people in their communities. So how does this finding connect to prayer? Here's what I think prayer does that almost nothing else can. Prayer creates a felt sense of connection, even when a person is completely physically alone. A widow living in a quiet apartment with children who live 3 states away is not, in the moment that she prays, experiencing herself as alone. She is in relationship with God. Now, whether you believe in God or if you simply think about it as a profound reframe of the mind, the effect on loneliness, this is the single modifiable dementia risk that we have discussed, is the same. For the millions of people who feel utterly alone in their situation, I think this isn't just a small comfort, it's very biologically significant. Please send this to someone right now who you think may be lonely. It might be the reminder that they need today. So if praying alone helps, then gathering to pray may help even more, right? Now here the evidence gets really strong for this kind of research. Dr. Tyler Vander Weel and his team at Harvard followed more than 74,000 women for 16 years. Women who attended religious services more than once a week had a 33% lower risk of dying during the study period than women who never went. Let me repeat that for emphasis. 33% lower risk of dying from attending religious services more than once a week. In related work, frequent attendance was associated with a roughly 5-fold lower suicide rate and far lower rates of what economists would grimly call deaths of despair. That's like death from alcohol, drugs, and other things. These are studies of attendance, mostly in women, and they're observational, meaning that they find a very strong link, but it can't prove that showing up caused it. However, to me, it makes a lot of sense. So why would showing up matter so much? Because 1 hour in church or temple delivers nearly everything that protects an aging brain, all bundled together. Belonging, purpose, ritual, singing, a reason to get dressed and leave the house, and dozens of small human interactions. It's a strong protection against loneliness. I also think none of this is new. In 1902, the great Harvard psychologist William James published The Varieties of Religious Experience, lectures that he gave in Edinburgh, still in print today. James studied prayer not as a preacher, but as a scientist of the mind, and he called prayer the very soul and essence of religion, insisting that its effects on a human life were real and measurable, whatever their ultimate source. I think we've taken this seriously for over 120 years, and all that's changed is the instruments that we use to measure it today. Then there's a study that complicates everything I just told you. It involved 1,800 patients, and the result made headlines around the world. Remember that experiment, that I mentioned in my introduction? So here it is again. Herbert Benson, the same relaxation response cardiologist, led a rigorous trial called STEP, S-T-E-P, published in 2006 in the American Heart Journal. 1,800 heart bypass patients were split into groups, and strangers in distant congregations were assigned to pray for some of them by name. The question they asked was blunt. Does being prayed for by people you'll never meet improve your recovery? The answer was no. Patients who were prayed for did no better than those who weren't. And in a detail that unsettled everyone, patients who knew for sure that they were being prayed for by others had slightly more complications, possibly the pressure of expectations. So this is the study I often hear skeptics cite to say that prayer doesn't do anything or prayer doesn't matter. And I wanted to mention that in case somebody tries to refute what I think are the very powerful benefits of prayer. And think about closely at that study. The STEP trial tested what they call intercessory prayer, that is strangers praying at a distance for another stranger's body to heal. I think that's a completely different thing from what we're talking about earlier, from a person who is praying themselves or a family that's gathered at someone's bedside. Every single protective effect of prayer that we've discussed flows through the person doing the praying, their calmer stress response, their engaged brain, their felt connection, their reason to gather with others. I think none of that requires a miracle, and none of it is what that STEP trial tested. Praying to fix a stranger's heart from across the country is not the same as prayer changing the brain of the one who prays. Even the famous depression finding from Duke University, where researcher Harold Koenig found that people who prayed recovered faster, it traced it all back to their intrinsic faith. That is, a person's deep inner commitment to their faith, not how often they prayed or even if they attended religious service. Prayer is robustly associated with better brain and mood outcomes. But some people say it has not been proven to cause them. Healthier and less depressed people may simply pray more to begin with. There's one more voice I want to bring to the table here. In 1880, the Russian novelist Fyodor Dostoevsky published The Brothers Karamazov and put into the mouth of a dying monk, Elder Zosima, a line that a neuroscientist could sign today: prayer is an education. Not a magic spell, but an education. Something that trains the mind the way that lifting weights trains a muscle. Zosima drew one more distinction that I think every caregiver out there needs to hear. He separated fanciful love from active love. He said fanciful love wants quick results and applause. Active love is the patient and unglamorous daily work. Fanciful love runs on short dopamine spikes that crash into bitterness the moment that things get hard. Active love, cultivated through daily practice and quiet service, draws on those deep prefrontal networks and the body's calming systems. It's the difference between the burst of energy that gets you through a day and the steady endurance that carries you through the ups and downs in life. So what do you actually do with all this? I think 4 things, and every one of them is free. First, if prayer or quiet contemplation already means something to you, please protect it or rebuild the habit if you've lost it. It's free, it's safe, and the science strongly supports it. Consistency beats intensity. A steady 10 or 15 focus minutes daily beats a rare marathon. And the key, exactly as Maimonides said, is focus. Gently pulling your attention back each time it drifts. The focus is really the exercise. Second, prioritize the communal part of it when you can, because that's where the strongest evidence is. If getting outside is hard for you, get a ride to services or even a stream service followed by a real phone call. Any of that can preserve the human connection that really matters. And do not underestimate the power of even one phone call and having a conversation with someone. Third, if you love someone who is living with dementia, use their oldest and most familiar prayers and hymns as a bridge to reach them. And here's a finding for exhausted caregivers. A study using the long-running national data published in the journal Religions looked at older adults already living with mild memory impairment. More frequent private prayer was associated with fewer distressing behaviors, better thinking scores, and this one matters enormously for any of you that are caregiving, fewer sleep disturbances. For a family that's worn down by a loved one's nighttime agitation, better sleep is essential. And fourth, please hear this. You are not alone in any of this. Dial 211 from any phone, free 24 hours a day for local caregiving and respite help if you or your loved one is lonely. Call the Elder Care Locator, 1-800-677-1116 to find your local area agency on aging. AARP runs a free family caregiving line, 1-877-333-5885. Write those down. One caution, for some caregivers or people going through intensely difficult challenges with health, I've sometimes seen that faith under strain curdles into anger at God or a feeling of being abandoned. If that's you, I don't think it's a moral failure. It's a documented warning sign for stress and burnout. Please reach out to a chaplain or a counselor. Turning towards support helps. Carrying the struggle alone often makes it worse. Which brings me back to the moment that I opened with. The thing that survives longer than a person's own name. Dementia does not erase the brain evenly. It often takes the newest memories first. So what happened this morning, last week, the grandchild that was born a couple of years ago. But prayers and hymns learned in childhood and repeated thousands of times across a lifetime are stored somewhere deeper in the brain. In what scientists call procedural memory, the oldest and most durable layer, the part that the disease reaches last. It's the same reason that a person can forget your face, but sometimes still ride a bicycle. Chaplains and even hospice nurses see it constantly. Someone who can no longer form a sentence will still move their lips to the Lord's Prayer. A woman who's forgotten her own children will sing every word of Amazing Grace. So picture this. A daughter sits at her mother's bedside who's living with dementia. Her mother hasn't even known her name for months, and the daughter is totally out of words. So she does the only thing left. She leans in closely and begins softly, "Our Father who art in heaven." And her mother's lips begin to move, and she finishes every single word. That is not a miracle in the medical sense. It is memory, the deepest kind, written in love and repetition, surviving in a mind sometimes where nearly everything else has gone dark. But you tell me, doesn't it feel like grace? So here's my ask. If you learned even one helpful thing in the last few minutes that you didn't know before, please follow along or subscribe because I do this every single week and I want to make sure these get to you. And share this with one other person, someone out there who this could help. Because if the science is right about any of these things today, it's this. The solution to loneliness may already be in their hands. They just needed somebody to remind them. and let that someone be you. I'm Neal K. Shah. Thank you for spending this time with me, and I'll see you in the next one.